1942, 11:15 p.m. The beach at Corregidor Island, Philippines. In the darkness, a small PT boat idles at the shore. General Douglas MacArthur, commander of all Allied forces in the Pacific, steps aboard. Behind him, 76,000 American and Filipino soldiers stand on the Bataan Peninsula, starving, out of ammunition, no air support, no navy, no relief convoy coming. They'd been fighting for 3 months against an enemy that outnumbers and outguns them, and their commander is getting on a boat. What happened next became one of the most controversial decisions in American military history. 76,000 men were left behind. Over the next 3 years, more than 26,000 of them would die, from execution, starvation, disease, and brutality. And the general who left them? He was awarded the Medal of Honor. This is the story of Bataan, the betrayal that America spent 40 years trying to hide. To understand what happened on Bataan, we need to go back exactly 3 months earlier. December 8, 1941, the morning after Pearl Harbor, General Douglas MacArthur commanded 130,000 troops in the Philippines. He had received the warning from Washington the night before. Japan was attacking Pearl Harbor. He had 8 hours to prepare, 8 hours to disperse his aircraft, 8 hours to move his supplies, 8 hours to get his men into defensive positions. He did nothing. At noon on December 8th, Japanese bombers arrived over Clark Field, the main American air base in the Philippines. They found MacArthur's entire air force sitting on the ground, lined up, wingtip to wingtip, parked as if no one had told them war had started, because no one had. In 2 hours, MacArthur's air force was destroyed. 100 aircraft gone. America had lost control of the skies over the Philippines before the war was 1 day old. 3 days later, Japanese forces landed on Luzon, the main island. They came in overwhelming numbers, 200,000 soldiers under General Homa Masaharu. MacArthur had a plan, War Plan Orange, that had existed for 20 years. It said, if Japan attacks, withdraw to the Bataan Peninsula, hold out, wait for reinforcements. Except MacArthur had spent months telling everyone War Plan Orange was unnecessary. He had convinced Washington, and himself, that he could stop Japan at the beaches. He couldn't. On December 23, with Japanese forces closing in, MacArthur finally ordered the retreat to Bataan. The problem? The supplies weren't there. They'd been scattered across Luzon based on MacArthur's optimistic beach defense plan. 76,000 soldiers arrived at Bataan with enough food for 30 days. They were about to be trapped there for 4 months. Bataan is a peninsula, roughly 25 miles long, 20 miles wide, covered in dense jungle, cut by rivers, ringed by mountains. For 76,000 men, it became a prison. The Japanese expected Bataan to fall in a week. MacArthur's men held for 4 months, not because they had supplies, not because they had air cover, not because reinforcements were coming. They held because of something the Japanese hadn't calculated. These men had nothing left to lose, and they fought like it. By February 1942, the daily ration had been cut to 1,000 calories. Normal combat ration, 4,000 calories. Soldiers were eating carabao, Filipino water buffalo, then horses, then monkeys, then grass. Malaria swept through the peninsula, then dysentery, then scurvy. By March, 80% of the men on Bataan had malaria. The hospital ships that were supposed to evacuate the sick, Japan had blockaded the harbor. Nothing could get in, nothing could get out. General Jonathan Wainwright, MacArthur's second-in-command, sent desperate messages to Washington. He needed food, he needed medicine, he needed ammunition. The answer from Washington came back through MacArthur's headquarters. Europe first. The Philippines were not the priority. Britain was the priority. The Atlantic was the priority. The men on Bataan, 76,000 of them, had been quietly written off. They just didn't know it yet. In Washington, the decision had already been made. President Roosevelt, Army Chief of Staff George Marshall, and British Prime Minister Churchill had agreed. The war would be won in Europe first. The Pacific would have to wait. What this meant in practice: no relief convoy was coming to the Philippines, no navy, no food ships, no reinforcements. MacArthur knew this by late January 1942. He sent message after message to Washington, some angry, some desperate, some almost incoherent. He told his men help was coming. He told Washington the situation was catastrophic. He told different things to different people. On February 22, 1942, a direct order arrived from President Roosevelt. MacArthur was ordered to leave the Philippines, not to surrender, not to fight to the death, to leave, to go to Australia and command the Pacific Theater from there. MacArthur refused. At first, he wrote back. He would resign his commission and fight as a private soldier on Bataan. This was the version of events he later told, the heroic version, the version that won him the Medal of Honor. The reality was somewhat different. On March 11, 1942, 2 weeks after Roosevelt's order, MacArthur finalized his plans. He selected which officers would go with him. He selected which personal belongings to pack. He packed his personal correspondence, his wife's belongings, his son's toy rabbit. He did not tell most of his commanders he was leaving. That night, 4 PT boats made the dangerous run through Japanese-controlled waters. MacArthur, his family, and 17 hand-picked officers escaped to Mindanao, then flew to Australia. Behind him, 76,000 men woke up the next morning. Their commander was gone. Private Leon Beck was a soldier on Bataan. He wrote in his diary, "We heard MacArthur had gone. Nobody said anything. We just looked at each other. The men on Bataan had a nickname for MacArthur. They called him Dugout Doug, because for the entire siege, MacArthur had commanded from the tunnels of Corregidor Island, just across the bay from Bataan, and had visited his men on the front lines exactly once, in 4 months of fighting. But even knowing this, even with all the resentment building, there had been one thing that kept the men going: MacArthur's public promise, broadcast over the radio, printed in newspapers. Help is coming. Help is on the way. It was a lie. MacArthur had known for weeks that help wasn't coming. He had kept sending messages to his troops saying it was. On April 9, 1942, 1 month after MacArthur's escape, Bataan fell. Major General Edward King made the decision to surrender. It was the largest surrender of American forces since the Civil War. 76,000 men became prisoners of war. What happened next, Japan has never fully apologized for. The Bataan Death March. 65 miles. Through tropical heat. No food. Almost no water. Any man who fell behind was executed, shot, bayonet, or beheaded on the road. Exact numbers are disputed, but historians estimate between 5,000 and 10,000 men died on the march itself. That's more Americans killed in a single event than died on D-Day. And almost no one in America knew it was happening, because the story was classified. The U.S. government knew about the Death March by early 1943. Survivors had escaped and reported what happened. Washington decided not to publish it immediately. The reason? They feared it would demoralize the American public. They were also afraid it would raise questions about MacArthur, about why he left, about whether those men had been abandoned. The survivors who made it to prison camps faced 3 more years of starvation, forced labor, and disease. By the time the Philippines were liberated in 1945, of the 76,000 men on Bataan, more than 26,000 were dead. That's more than 1 in 3. And Douglas MacArthur was in Australia, planning his return. On March 25, 1942, 2 weeks after he escaped from the Philippines, MacArthur was awarded the Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, given to those who display conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty. MacArthur received it for the defense of the Philippines. The defense he had largely failed to prepare for. The defense he had eventually abandoned. Historians have debated this for decades. The consensus among military scholars is uncomfortable. Roosevelt gave MacArthur the Medal of Honor for political reasons. America needed a hero. The Pacific War was going badly. The public needed someone to believe in. MacArthur, with his corncob pipe and his famous proclamation, "I shall return," filled that role perfectly. It didn't matter what the men on Bataan thought of him. They weren't going to be talking to reporters anytime soon. For decades, the full story of Bataan was restricted. Survivor testimony was classified. Internal military reports were sealed. The men who returned were told, informally, but clearly, that certain things were better left unsaid. Not because those things weren't true, because the truth was inconvenient. Here is the part of this story that very few history books include. MacArthur had been warned about the Japanese threat to the Philippines as early as October 1941. 2 months before Pearl Harbor, American codebreakers had been reading Japanese diplomatic traffic. The signals were clear. An attack was coming. The Philippines were a target. MacArthur knew this. He also knew something else. He had been receiving a secret payment from the Philippine government, $500,000. In 1942 dollars. That's roughly $9 million today, paid to MacArthur personally by Philippine President Manuel Quezon, in exchange for MacArthur's loyalty to the Philippines, his advocacy in Washington, his commitment to their defense. The payment was made in January 1942. While 76,000 men were slowly starving on Bataan. It was technically legal. It was authorized by Quezon, but it was never disclosed to Washington. It was never disclosed to the public. It was classified for decades. When it finally came out in the 1970s, it raised a question that has never been fully answered. Did MacArthur's financial relationship with the Philippine government influence any of the decisions he made? We don't know. We may never know. But the men on Bataan deserved a commander who had no such complications. MacArthur did return to the Philippines. He was right about that. In October 1944, he waded ashore at Leyte Gulf in a staged photo opportunity that became one of the most famous images of the war. He accepted Japan's surrender on the deck of the USS Missouri in September 1945. Tall, commanding, the picture of a victorious general. The men of Bataan who survived came home quietly. No parades for most of them. No Medal of Honor. Many of them were sick. Many of them were broken. All of them carried memories that no one in America wanted to hear about. Sergeant Forrest Knox, a Bataan survivor, put it simply when he was finally interviewed decades later. "We didn't lose on Bataan, we were lost. There is a difference." Douglas MacArthur died in 1964. He was 84 years old. He received a state funeral at the U.S. Capitol. He was eulogized as one of the greatest generals in American history. The men of Bataan were not asked to speak. If this story reached you, if it's the first time you've heard it, share it. These men waited their entire lives for someone to tell the truth. The least we can do is listen.